You're doing great, by the way. You're doing great.
Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you here. Welcome to Intelligent Speech 2020. So just a quick pointer. We should have about 20 minutes of talk, and then we also have time for Q&A at the end. So you can use the bar at the side to kind of chat, give your opinions, chat between yourselves, because we really want to hear that. All that openness, as Rothbard said at the start, at any point. And then if you want to ask a question for the Q&A that comes to your mind at any point, you can just click on the Ask a Question button down below and put in your question there, and we will cover that in the Q&A at the end. So I will hand over to our speaker, Mr. Pete Collman. Over to you, Pete.
Thank you very much. It was great to be here. I've really enjoyed my afternoon, all the great things that I've been watching and listening to. It's been wonderful. It's been great hearing so many different voices in the podcasting world, especially watching people that you don't normally get to see in this medium of trying to listen to podcasts in an audio way. And some of the things that we're going to talk about today about Podcastnik Productions is kind of the venturing in from podcast on an audio format to something on a YouTube format as well. And things that you can expand on when you're talking about your podcast sort of ideas and where to start with. First, I'll just kind of tell you a bit about myself. My name is Pete Collman, and I'm in Prague. You might see over there, over my shoulder here, city of Prague. I moved to Prague almost 10 years ago. I'm an American expat living over here. I'm here helping to raise my kids. I've got two kids, a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old, so I'm feeling a little old about that lately. But when I first moved here, I got a job in IT, and I met a guy named Travis Dow, who's my partner in crime. We were talking over a coffee break once, and saying, "Hey, you're from the States?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm from Oregon, but I grew up in Munich." I said, "Oh, that's great. I'm from DC area, and I grew up in the East Coast." And we started talking, and our joy of listening to podcasts, especially history podcasts. And he said that he always wanted to start something on alchemy, and Prague being one of the capitals of the high Middle Ages of alchemy, going into that era, was one of the things that brought him here. He wanted to really kind of discuss it, and he wanted to do a show on it. And I said, "You know what? That's a great idea. Let's do something together." And this was 2012. We did this, and then I said, "I want to do a show myself where you could be my co-host, and we'll talk about what it's like to be an American expat living and adjusting to life in the Czech Republic." And we called his show The History of Alchemy. We called my show the Bohemian Podcast, like Bohemian American. And we started there, and that was almost 7.5 years ago that we did this. And it kind of spawned into our own little mini empire. And this may be something that we want to talk about today, about how to start something with a little seedling, a little mustard seed, and seeing how far it can grow into something that is unique and really the driving force about why we all like podcasting, which is it really is a way to go out there and have freedom of speech, to get your opinions across and your thoughts across. If you're lucky, maybe something it will help another person out with maybe a different way of thinking, or expand your thoughts on things. And it's truly a message service that I really enjoy. And we have several different shows, and I'm going to share my screen here in a few minutes to kind of show you. Oh, there's Tegan. Hi, Tegan. Oh, real quick note, Tegan Phillips. I just saw her podcast interview. Tegan had moved to Europe and started going to school here. And I remember asking, like, how do we get involved in podcasting? So this is also a key point when you talk about podcasting. You make friends. The colleagues that you have here are just absolutely wonderful. Even if you don't agree on maybe some of the things they talk about, because the whole world is open to different sort of viewpoints. You run into so many different personalities, but it's a close-knit fraternity, sorority of podcasters that want to see each other succeed. And I would say that if we have any success at all, it's only because of our hard work, but also because of the friendships that we've made and the mentorship that we got from like Ben Jacobs and Royfield and all these other great guys that we just kind of listen to podcasts and say, hey, you know what? That works. that won't work for us. This is good. This isn't good. And you kind of spread that forward. You pay it forward. And Tegan's done a great show with that and talking about her experiences. And it's a wonderful community. So without further ado, we'll talk about what Podcastnik Productions is all about. Yes, it's a play on Sputnik. Travis thought that was a good idea to put that into the title. And we decided to kind of house our efforts into one umbrella. And this umbrella, we made it an LLC in the United States a few years ago so that we can do some more things with selling some merchandise, maybe getting some underwriting here and there, and enable us to do some new projects that we just started 2 years ago. But first, we started with these little seedlings we just talked about at the top, at about halfway through the hour here, with our History of Alchemy and our Bohemian podcast. And I'll see if I can share my screen here. I'll give this a try, guys. All right, so hang tight. All right, and let's see. We will share this part here with the Podcastnik team. Okay, so we have several websites. And what I would tell you as we go through this, before I kind of dive into each one of our shows, is maybe I'm going to inspire somebody that's listening today to start their own podcast. And you're like, oh my God, what do I do? What's the equipment? Who do I talk to about podcast hosting? And do I do a website right now? Or what do I do with that? How do I measure? How do I find metrics? And how can I use those metrics? There's a lot of information. I think the first thing you can do is you can do a basic search. Everybody and their mother has got a viewpoint basically on what equipment you want to use, editing software for your audio podcasts. It's very basic. If you can, you need a microphone, you need some editing software, and a hoster, and you're off to the races. And we started that small too. We made a lot of mistakes. I think I remember in the first month or so, we put our shows out, and we only had audio in one channel. So I think we got somebody that was a trucker in the middle of the United States that was driving the road from Kansas City to Little Rock, and just doing a quick little jump over. And he's like, "Hey, I love your show, but it sounds weird." So it was kind of those type of things we were listening to try to make our podcast better technically. And then later on, we started realizing that we shouldn't be reading our scripts. We were writing these great scripts about history of Prague and what it was like to go walk through Prague in the middle of the night, and the history that we see here in living in this amazing city. And it wound up being a situation where it sounded too stilted. So I told Travis, let's just relax. Let's have a beer, not be so uptight about it, and have fun and just talk. And I think that's worked for us, having a back and forth on our show for many years. And when we went away with that and started doing our own sort of shows individually, it was really hard to take those training wheels off and say, okay, I'm going to run with it as a solo podcaster now and not have somebody to play off of. It was difficult, but now we have the experience that we can do both. We can, have a show where we're talking to each other, or we're doing something on our own. Over the course of the years, Travis was relocated for business back to the United States, to the West Coast. So he's 9 hours behind me, which makes it very difficult to do any kind of shows together. But we make the effort when we do have some joint projects going on. We'll get to Travis's unique story in a minute. I will have to preface that with that Travis is a unique individual. So I'm probably more the straight-laced of the duo here, but Travis is a guy that definitely is a person that you gravitate to, and that's how we kind of got started with our shows. So if you can take a look at the screen right here, we have our podcasting team. There's me, there's Travis, there's Toby, who's brand new, who talks about transgendered lifestyle and his particular story through that process. Ahmad, who is a Syrian refugee. Now, this is a great story that we did. We realized that Travis, who speaks fluent German, started doing some shows about the history of Germany, all right? And this was at the time, just post of the Arab Spring, and there was a lot of refugees coming to Europe, especially to Germany. And there was a Syrian refugee that was like, listen, Travis, I love your show, but I know a lot of my family members don't know German just yet. And we want to teach them the culture of Germany as maybe their potential new home so they can acclimate better and feel more a part of that society. And Travis loved the idea. So what he did was he said, I will buy you a laptop and the software. If you can get the money together for a microphone, what we'll do is you'll help me translate the German podcast into Arabic so that we can have an Arabic audience. And I thought it was just an awesome idea because it was something where, again, we're paying it forward to kind of give our audience a bigger group of listeners a chance to kind of listen to what Travis was doing with the history of Germany. And we hope that that's probably helped some people acclimate a little bit more into their new German homeland from being a refugee for so many years. And as we said here on the screen, Ahmad is our hero. so he does a lot of good work. Of course, there's Judith. Judith is great. We got to meet her in Nuremberg a few years ago. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, about that Nuremberg trip. She's taken over for the history of Germany for Travis in a lot of ways. So Travis can do some other projects. And then, of course, we have Der Budler. Der Budler is German for the digger. He is an awesome dude. He has his own show, and Travis would translate that into English. So a lot of translations going back and forth here. So we have a German audience, we've got an Arabic audience, we've got an English-speaking audience on a variety of subjects. And that is our Podcastnik family in a nutshell, which is kind of nice. I'm going to go to another. Oh, actually, I'll show you this. I don't know if you can hear this, guys, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go to some of our videos here. What we did when we put these things together is we wanted to have some video options on YouTube so people can see what we're doing. And here's Travis. I'm just going to push play if you can't hear him, but this is Travis, and I'm going to speak over him because I don't know if you can hear him.
We can hear him very faintly.
Okay, very faintly. That's fine. I'm more important. You hear me, all right? I'll tell that to Travis later. He'll get a good kick out of that. But Travis's story is very interesting, and I wish he was here today to talk to you guys in person. But he has had a very interesting road to where he is now. And besides doing this podcasting on his personal life, Travis came out last year after moving back to the United States. He came to Germany. He met somebody he really enjoyed, Toby. And Toby is a transgender person. And here he's Toby right here. And and so they have their own. He has his own podcast called "What's in Your Pants," okay, which is interesting. And just talking about the how would you say the journey, so to speak, of a person that is coming to grips with who they are. And now that Travis is part of that, I feel okay to say this for him and his behalf because he's very open about it. That he's gone through a lot of life changes in the past few years, and this is something he wanted to share, his relationship with Toby. So awesome. I think, again, it adds that little bit of extra spice in our shows that people get to know who we are as people and, hear more about what we're doing as podcasters. Okay. So I haven't got a chance to see if we have any questions yet. Let me see if I can go back to not sharing.
I don't think we do. Not yet.
Okay. That's okay. Do we need to, how do I go back to not sharing? I think it's here.
I can't see your other screen anymore.
Okay. I think that's fine. I'll go back to my entire screen. Okay. Perfect. Can you see me? Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Great. Royfield, hi, buddy. Royfield's great. What a great mentor Royfield's been. Thank you for listening, bud. So we have all these other programs, and I would have to say I'm very proud of what we've done over the years. We've really had our struggles, and we've learned from those struggles, and we've done some pretty cool things. I would say one of the coolest events that we ever did, and for Podcastnik Productions, was Travis wanted to do a show in German in Nuremberg, and he lined it up with a lot of his listeners, German-speaking listening listeners through Deutschland, and to come down to Nuremberg. And people drove from all around Germany to come down. We had an audience of about 15 or 20 people in Nuremberg. And he was basically kind of doing like a stand-up routine as an homage to the late Don Rickles. So I want you to kind of let that sink in for a minute. Okay. Travis loved the kind of edgy humor Don Rickles had. He had just passed away. And he said, you know what? I do a show called Americana für euch. And Americana für euch is Americana for you. And it's all in German. And he had a huge following. He put out like 50 or 60 of these episodes where he did kind of like a radio drama on any subject you can think of, from race riots to women's suffragette movements, to the legend of Davy Crockett, anything that maybe a German may not fully know other than watching in movies or news about what it's like to be an American. And it was really interesting to get the take on Germans listening to this, and the way Travis would kind of put himself into the story, maybe as a runaway slave, following the Freedom Trail, or talking about what it was like to survive World War I in the trenches from the American standpoint. So he had a lot of great sort of stories with this, and he thought culture was part of it. So he wanted to see how Germans would take a Don Rickles-like homage and that era of that kind of comedy. So we drove out. I drove him from Prague over to Nuremberg, and we had this all set up. We got this nice little bar, and of all things, an old Nazi barracks. Of all things, we're talking about a Jewish comedian, Don Rickles, in a Nazi barracks. So, it was surreal, to be honest, and in German. The whole thing was in German. I ran the camera. I didn't understand it. It was very, very interesting to see that our little show had a very strong following of people wanting to know more about America and kind of our little idiosyncrasies that we have in the United States. And it was so great to see people that made the effort to drive all the way to Nuremberg to see us. And of course, we took a look at some of the historical places there in Nuremberg as well, to get that really tough history about the Third Reich and how the Germans handled that history, and what they do with monuments, what they do with what they keep and what they tear down. Somewhat apropos to what we're seeing today in some of our discussions with protests about inequality. So, yeah, that's also very interesting. For my show, I can tell you more about my viewpoints on what we've done. The Bohemican podcast is kind of my love letter to being in Czech Republic. People have asked me, like, well, don't you miss being in the United States? I said, I do. I mean, I really do. It's my home. It's my family. It's my center. I'm an American. I'm brought up as an American, and no matter where you go, that's kind of where I'm always going to be. But I have a second home here, and I really enjoy the Czech people. And I think for me, I wanted to immerse myself in the history of Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia and Bohemia and Moravia. And get to know these people that I work with, and make sure my kids are having that part of their heritage as well, because they're American and they're Czech. So one of the things that I enjoy doing out of the 90 or 100 episodes we have of the Bohemican podcast over the past 7 years was interviewing people and talking to them about their experiences under communism, their experiences after post-Velvet Revolution, here what it was like in Prague, and just kind of getting an idea about their traditions and culture. There is a legend for every little thing you can think of here in Prague, and that's why when I tell people, hey, when I come to Europe, you got to hit Prague. It's an amazing place, such a cool town to be in, and so it is a legend around every corner, and that's part of what the show is all about. So I do have here, if you have any questions, you can also send us a little question here. And
I think we have one.
Oh, do we?
Yeah. So Janica Dillon asks, I have an idea for a historical podcast, but the amount of research it requires is quite daunting. Any advice on how to manage or think about the research that goes into each episode?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And that's a great question, because most of the circle of people that we have in our podcast family have history in their blood running through it. They want to know more about and podcast about history. And one thing I would say is that expand your research, of course, beyond Wikipedia. Okay, maybe that's where you start to get an idea about what some background on. But you start going into certain things. Travis and I would collect a bunch of books, and I've got a bunch that I kept here in Prague. He's got a bunch in Oregon, where we would just read. And that was the hardest thing. We would have to read in our lunch breaks. We'd have to read and watch documentaries, on the weekend or late at night. And then we would write our scripts. And we would go through our scripts, and not like a term paper where we need to cite everything, but we did have something on our website for citations, or we said for more reading materials, you can go to this. And we usually put that tag at the end of most of our shows to get people interested in reading some things. But there is research involved. And I would say that you need to be diligent with that, because the one thing you can do to destroy listenership is say something that's going to wreck your credibility. And so if you say something that, and none of us are perfect, but if you say something that is completely off base and you have no way to really back it up, that's going to be a problem. Someone will call you out on it, I promise. But I would say definitely, start reading a lot of books, watch some documentaries, and when you're writing your script, make it loose so that you sound conversational, that you know what you're talking about. Remember, you're the expert. You're what we call in the IT business an SME, a subject matter expert when it comes to this. And I think that's great. Back it up for sure.
Okay, so we've got another question from Tegan Phillips, who says, do you or how do you feel your viewpoint has changed since you started these various podcast projects?
Oh, wow. My viewpoints. Yeah. We just talked about the German influence on Travis and his show. And, he's in an interesting situation because he had his formative years in Munich and then went to college at Oregon State University. So he had a foot in both worlds, kind of like my kids. My kids they speak Czech and they're fluent in Czech and fluent in English. I take them home to America when I can, so they have that part of their background. But it's very unique to be a person that's got one leg in one continent, one in another. And I think that for me, looking at that and trying to find out where your sense of home is eye opener. And I see that in a lot of our podcasts. I would say that, the history of Germany, listening to some of his shows that he translates into English, really opens my eyes. I have a German ancestry background too. My German ancestry, or my ancestors came over in the 1850s from Ostfriesland to start a new life in America. And like many Americans, a lot of us have German background for this massive immigration that we came over to the United States. And they left pretty much at the best time because the 20th century, as we all know, was pretty horrific for everybody involved, including the Germans. Some of it self-inflicted, of course. And, having that nature and how they have come together with this, reunification of Germany, that's been an eye-opener for me. It's some things I never really thought about as an American, about what it's like to deal with that kind of heavy past, that heavy, stuff on your shoulders, and still be moving forward as a very strong EU member now. So that's one thing. Listening to Toby's podcast is eye-opener. I knew nothing about what it's like to be transgender. No idea. So listening to his show and Travis's experience with Toby has also been eye-opening. And I think, Royfield at the beginning of today, when he was opening the ceremonies with this, said, if you can, listen to something that you may not agree with or you may not feel comfortable with, because that's probably the best thing you can do. It's going to open your eyes to a lot of new things. And again, one of the great concepts of podcasting is that freedom of speech, that you can really kind of, give your viewpoints and listen to people and have that nice trade of ideas.
Great we don't have another question for our audience, although as I'm saying, I encourage you to ask any more if you think of any. But a question from me then, what did you find the most difficult thing when you started podcasting that maybe you didn't think would be difficult?
I think the reach. For me, I was really surprised at the amount of reach. Travis and I would I think 2 or 3 months into this, we were kind of looking at our metrics going, oh my God, we've got 400 people that listen to our show. And we're like, we almost feel like a major classroom at a Big Ten school. That's awesome, right? And then before you know it, we have thousands and thousands weekly and thousands daily if you add up our shows. And it got to the point where it kind of got a little a little anxious that, was going to be a hobby and something that was kind of, fun to kind of talk off, the top of your head. You started thinking, okay, I need to do a lot more work on this because a lot of people are listening, and not that they're judging, but there's an expectation, and you want to meet that expectation. For me, that was something that pushed me to be better in podcasting and to kind of reach out a little bit more to a lot more people. Again, the technical parts come together. They come with time, and you'll find that little sweet spot on what sounds good for you. Editing. I know that for me, when I went solo with some of my shows after Travis moved to America, and I didn't have a podcast partner in the same room, I started adding sound effects and music, and I had to do my research about what could be used on YouTube, what could be used on podcasting, so that I didn't have any violations, and how I need to edit music and sound effects in a way to kind of paint that picture. That was more of my background in college, was doing documentaries and radio news. And so I love going back to my roots on that.
Okay, well, is there anything more that you wanted to talk about or that you feel you haven't had time to discuss? Yeah,
there's a couple things later on tonight. If those of you that might be interested, we'll talk more about my latest endeavor, which is the Past Access show. One thing that you can't see here with me right now is that I'm a person living with a disability. I'm a paraplegic. I had a spinal cord injury in 1984. Seems a long time ago. That rendered me actually quadriplegic, but over years of therapy and whatnot, I was able to get my hands back, and some nerve damage was recovered. But I'm a wheelchair user, so moving to a place like Prague with cobblestones and old buildings is a challenge at times, but it hasn't stopped me from getting the story, hasn't stopped me from going out and researching and interviewing people. That show, Past Access, was a love letter to other people with disabilities about traveling. I'll talk more about that later on tonight. It might be about 10 o'clock my time in Central Europe, but that's part of our podcasting network show. And it's something that Travis and I he's been a great backer of this. He says, this is our crown jewel, is Past Access on YouTube and also on our podcast channel. Because we're trying to inspire people with disabilities to travel. It's very scary to get on an airplane and go to a foreign country as a wheelchair user. Hope that your wheelchair doesn't get lost. Hope that you don't get sick. Hope you have the right backup medical stuff you need. Is it worth it? Are you going to be stuck everywhere because there's stairs everywhere? All those concerns, we want to kind of melt away a little bit with my experiences. So for the past few years, I've been traveling to all the great cities in Europe, reporting back to people about what it's like to travel in Paris. We've got correspondents that we use that have traveled to North Africa, riding camels, which you can imagine being a wheelchair user and being put up on top of a camel. We have some of our correspondents doing that to kind of show you that life does go on after a spinal cord injury or an acquired injury or a congenital injury or illness, that it's important. And so we'll talk more about that later on tonight if you want to join me for that. If there's any more questions, we'll see.
Well, I think we do have one. Another one from Janika Dillon, who says, any advice on how to find podcast mentors?
I'm sorry, find podcast what?
Mentors.
Start listening. Really, it sounds that simple. You start listening to all these different podcasters. Go on and pick something. Of course, you're going to have some of these great podcasts that are run by small businesses or big networks, famous people that you might know. Those are very entertaining. Nothing to take away from that. But Travis and I in Podcastnik Productions are on that lower end of guys that try really hard. Okay, we try really, really hard. And we try to put out things that I think people would like. It may not be as polished, but we try. I would say that once you listen to some people, most people like myself, and I'm more than happy, you write me an email, I'm going to reply to you. I'm going to say, yeah, this is what you need to do, or get started here. Welcome to the podcast family. You're going to have a lot of people doing that. And before you know it, you'll be invited onto shows so that you can showcase your new show to an established listenership right? So I remember we did this once with a show called Come and Take It, which was a Texas-based show. And one of their episodes was about Czech immigrants that came to the United States and lived in Texas. And so we got on their show, and all of a sudden we saw this bump of all these people that started listening to the Bohemican podcast. So it's a small community in a lot of ways. Start listening to some shows, that really inspire you, and then just reach out to them. And I would say that maybe 6 out of 10 of them will say, great things to you and help you on your way to becoming a good podcaster.
So we don't have any more questions from the public, but I'll field one.
Okay.
So what was it that first inspired you to be in the business of podcasting? Is it something you kind of wanted to do and got into it, or just something that you kind of happened to stumble upon, if that's the right word?
Well, yeah, my background for years, when I was I went to Marshall University in West Virginia, and I went there for the radio and TV journalism department. And I just dove into it in the 90s. Sports broadcasting, news broadcasting, documentaries. And I found a love of storytelling. I just love doing it and recording something and adding sound effects. To me, when you put together a great script and you start, voicing over some things and adding your sound effects and the music to kind of change the mood from one thing to the other, I mean, it's like an artist, painting on canvas. That first layer might be kind of, unintelligible. You're making a base. And then you start building upon it, and before you know it, you step back and you go, "Oh, wow, okay, I got a nice picture here for people." And I will say this: the feedback that you get kind of keeps you motivated in a lot of ways. You might not get a lot of listeners at first. You may not be where you are if you're working a full-time job like Travis and I do, and you got kids and you're running around from practices to whatever, and being a parent, and you try to have a social life. And in between, you're doing your editing and podcasting, at 4 a.m. just to get it done. So you have to have love for it. But I remember doing a show for the Bohemican podcast. Some of my favorite shows were with my son, when he was little. He's 14 now, but when he was little, before we go to bed, I would record us and me talking to him about Czech legends and getting his viewpoint on the things he's heard in school. And I love re-listening to those episodes because it reminds me how little he was and impressionable to those stories when he was just a kid. And I got a thank you email from a woman in Australia who had Czech ancestry, and she wanted her kids to know more about her Czech homeland. And she had them listen to this, and they started getting hooked to my program, and they just binge listened to all 90 programs about the Czech Republic and all the history and culture and legends. So that made me feel great. It gave me the energy to kind of keep doing more shows. And especially with the Past Access show, there's been so many great feedback from people with disabilities saying, hey, Pete, you showed me how to get onto a train in a wheelchair in Vienna. I wasn't ever going to do it, but you showed me how to do it, and I did it. I'm like, oh, great. That's perfect. And we talk about history, and we talk about the things you get to see. Going out on a battlefield in a wheelchair can be very difficult, but there are ways to do it. And sometimes you kind of invoke change. I think I'm also on a history testimonial show later on today in a couple hours where we'll talk about that as well. So I hope you all can join me and see me at least a couple more times before the day is out.
Well, I mean, quickly talking about motivation, we've still got half a minutes left. Was there ever a point when you kind of struggled with motivation? And for maybe podcasters who want to do podcasts out there who are thinking of struggling, what would be your advice?
I would say, keep at it. One thing that's true with YouTube that's also true with your podcast is if you can have, and this is what we haven't succeeded in doing this because we have so many different irons in the fire. Travis and I both do. And if you can be set on a schedule, that is a huge deal to kind of connect with your listeners. They subscribe to your RSS feed. You have them go to your website. You get them involved in a lot of ways. But if you're releasing a show, I don't know, once every 5 weeks, that's fine. You can do that, but let people know that it's going to be a quarterly show. If you're going to do it every 2 weeks or every other week, stick to it because people are going to have an expectation to see that roll through their feed or come back to it. And it's even more important when you make the jump from audio podcast to YouTube, as I've experienced. You need to be on top of it because it's such a busy sort of area of people trying to get involved in YouTube. It really is a different animal, but there's no way I could have done the YouTube channel without my background on doing audio podcasts, because it's a great start. So if you have that kind of idea about going into YouTube, you really need to start with audio podcasts first. It would be my opinion, and it will help you as a springboard to something even bigger. But I would say, yes, there've been many times, especially with YouTube channel, when you, listen, my YouTube channels are great. I enjoy doing them. They're very polished. I think personally, they're some of the better ones out there for my level of work. And I'm not trying to say that in an ego sense. I'm just saying there's a month worth of work per show. And I put a lot of love and effort into the research and the editing for these things. But I don't get a lot of viewership because maybe I'm not doing something like TikTok, something, that's going to grab somebody really quickly. But I think my shows are substantive, and I think they're good for people to see what life is like with history and wheelchairs and all those wonderful things. So keep the faith. If you get down that you're not getting the numbers, don't worry. Just keep at it. Eventually, you're going to strike gold.
Well, we have another quick question from Tegan Phillips here saying, do you have a preference for podcast format, either when hosting or when listening? For example, solo versus co-hosting, interviewing, including video, etc. Okay.
Co-hosting is awesome. I will say, if you have a nice connection with somebody, like the back and forth I had with Travis, I got to the point where I was making sure Travis didn't have any caffeine before our podcast, and I had the caffeine because I would start off kind of slow, and he always was at about a 9 out of 10. Okay, so I had to kind of bring him back down a little bit so that we weren't over talking each other. But once you find that sweet spot of going back and forth, people love it. I mean, they feel like go back to the ideas of old radio. When people were going into radio, they used to say, at the end of the broadcast, thank you for inviting me into your home. And that's really kind of that personal sort of connection that you have with this format. People are taking you on the metro when they're going to work. They're putting you on the car stereo when they're driving into the office. Maybe they're watching your YouTube videos while they're getting their morning cup of coffee before they start their work emails. You become part of their lives. And I think there's a responsibility for that you publish on time, you do what you say you need to do. If you have that repertoire with somebody else, people love that. You're kind of like invited into their circle of friends. I would say that's probably the best one if you can. If you can't, you're going to have some charisma if you want people to kind of listen to you go about it solo. So if that's not your thing, there's other things you can do to maybe put more post-production into your programs to make it more interesting.
Okay, well, I think we're coming to the end of the session here, but it's been a brilliant session. Good to hear from you. Remind the audience some quick links about where they can find your podcast or you.
Yes, absolutely. You can go to Acast, and you can also go to our Agora podcast channel to see our links to all those things here. For the Bohemican podcast, I'll put that down here. You can go to bohemican.com. Right, you can go there as well to take a look at that from my website. It's got the links to all of our shows, but we usually put most of our things on Acast. And for the YouTube channel, you just go to pastaccess.com, or you just put in Past Access into your YouTube Finder, and you'll see our shows on Did You Know and the Past Access Travel Channel. So a lot of stuff there. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Pete. Lovely to hear from you. And as you said, the viewers will hopefully be able to find you in sessions later on. So yes. we'll see you in those. But for now, it's nice to hear from you. And bye-bye. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.